Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from group 3. We are going to present about German naming custom. Before we start, let me introduce myself. My name is Upidalia.
My name is Septia Shifail Wanisa.
My name is Azahra Putri Indirasari.
Okay, the first topic will be presented by me about background naming in Germany. Germany uses similar naming convention to Anglo-Australians. Most Germans have two personal names, one that is a first name and one as a middle name, and a family name, for example, Maria Anna Schaffer. The second, Germans generally followed some basic naming pattern or customs when choosing name for their children. However, these patterns were not always adhered to, and as German immigrants began new lives in America, many anglicized their names and began to adopt American naming custom in the later part of the 1800s. Just after about 1875, we see more Henrys than Heinrichs, Marys, and Maries. The next slide about surname in German. Surnames are passed down to subsequent generations through the father lineage. Most of the surnames adopted came from occupation, geography, characteristic, or patronymic. Centuries ago, our ancestors didn't have surnames. Communities often consisted of just a few people, and surnames were not needed to identify individuals. As village and town grew, surnames developed as a means to differentiate one Heinrich for another. Early on, the easiest way to identify a person was for him to assume a second name which usually was associated with some aspect of his life. This descriptive surname was most often derived from one of the following. The first is his occupation. The second, a physical characteristic such as black hair, short, and fat. The third, topographical or geographical features such as river, woods, and meadow. The last is the place or area in which he lived or worked. It means this could be a village or a specific as a building such as a church, or school. One of the most commonly used categories was the place or area in which the person lived or worked. And the last surname in Germany, the most common surnames include Müller, Schmidt, Smith, Schneider, Fischer, Weber, Meyer, 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 and Wagner. The next slide will be presented by Septia.
Next is German given names traditions. There are two German naming traditions, genealogies. The first one is German children were given two names, and the second name, not the first, is what you will find in records. This is because German boys almost always were baptized with the first name Johannes or Johann, abbreviated Jo. German girls were baptized Maria, Anna, or Anna Maria. These traditions started in the Middle Ages. This means a family could and commonly did have 5 boys, with the first name Johann. Sometimes this is confusing until we understand that the first name doesn't mean a thing. The second name, known as the root name and surname, would be used in marriage, tax, land, and death records. So, in a family with boys, Johann Friedrich, Johann Peter, Johann Daniel, etc., the children would be called by and recorded as Friedrich, Peter, uh, and Daniel. Usually, the name Johannes marked a true John, uh, who would continue to be so identified. By the 19th century, more families name give gave the children name 3 names. The second one is there is a tradition involving nicknames, often called Kurzformen, or meaning short forms. In English, most nicknames are created by dropping the last syllable of the given name. For example, Christopher and Christine become Chris. Germans, however, often shorten a given name by dropping the first part of it. Some of the many examples I use a more authentic but understandable German spelling. There are Niklaus becoming Klaus, Sebastian becoming Bastian, uh, Christopher becoming Stoppel, and Christina becoming Stint or Stina, Katerina becoming Trin. It is important to note that these familiar forms are used in church or other records, even though by today's standards we might expect full of formal names to be used. And next is naming patterns. In German-speaking areas, children were almost always named for one or more of their baptismal sponsor. The most common patterns would be for sons to be named in this order: firstborn, for father's father, secondborn, mother's fathers, thirdborn, fathers of the child, fourthborn, and on uncles of the child, and so on. The same patterns applies to the daughters, but with using the mother's names. For example, fathers, mothers. For the second born is mother's mother, and the third born is mothers of the child, aunts. The next topic will be presented by Azahra.
Okay, the next slide is birth or baptismal names in Germany. In naming Germany. 2 names were usually given to a child at the birth or baptism. In Germany, the first name, what we often refer to as a given name, was a spiritual name. Usually, to honor a favorite saint. The spiritual name was often used repeatedly in families. The second name, what we now would refer to as a middle name, was a secular or call name and was the name by which the person was known. One of the most common and heavily used science names for males was Johann with no S, and for females Johanna or Anna. Thus, in a hypothetical German family, we might see the example for male children name. The first name is Johann Heinrich Ripp. The second name, Johann Hermann Ripp. The last name, Johann Friedrich Ripp. Example for respectively, these children would be known as Heinrich to be Henry, Hermann, and Frederick to be Fred. Example for girls, we may see the first name Anna Mary Ripp, the second name Anna Catherine Ripp, the last name Anna Luz Ripp. Respectively, these children would be known as Maria to be Mary, Catherine, and Louis. Again, these patterns were not always carved in stone, but it is helpful to understand the basic custom when researching German families. You may know your ancestor was called Henry, and thus assume his name was Henry something Ripp, when in effect his name was John Henry Ripp. If his parents were called William and Catherine, their full names may have been Johann, William, and Anna Catherine. Okay, that's all the presentation from group 3 about naming German naming custom. Thank you and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.